So my name's Dave Price, and on this morning's show, we've got Nathaniel Whitestone. Nathaniel, good morning, sir.
Good morning, David.
How are we doing this bright, fine morning?
Oh my gosh, I'm here in a little flat in the center of Brighton, and there's sunshine. There's a little bit of traffic noise, so I hope that doesn't interfere. I'm drinking a cup of coffee, so I'm a happy creature right now.
I'm with you on that. Although I must admit, I must warn you, we've actually got a 3-month-old puppy.
Oh,
Just fed her. So if I suddenly scream, she's basically chewing my toes.
nice.
She's been good so far, so we'll see how we do. But first, before we start talking about a fairer society, I really wanted to delve into your background, actually. And that doesn't sound like a typical English accent you've got there.
No, that's true. I grew up in Vermont in the northeastern US, and I moved to the UK for love back in 2005, but I have hung on to the accent. Really, I hang on to it because when people think, "Oh, he's an American," they'll let me get away with talking about feelings or being overly friendly, that kind of thing.
Sure. But your background in America presumably led on to what you're doing in the UK with the Fair Society.
Yes, that's correct.
Well, you were co-founding an eco village network in America.
Yeah, so there's a global eco-village network that was started in 1994 at the Findhorn community in Scotland. Actually, there's a congress of all of these different really interesting communities that had been founded over the previous 50 years all around the world. And they came together to uh, basically set up an alliance around different kinds of sustainability. And so that happened in 1994. In 1994, I had just gone to university, and I wasn't aware that this thing was going on globally. But in 1996, I had left university and was traveling around to different intentional communities with my partner. And we happened to be part of the Fellowship for Intentional Communities board meeting at an eco village in Tennessee. And that eco village is fascinating. It's sort of the place where the midwifery renaissance got launched. They created the Geiger counters that Greenpeace used to catch the Russians dumping nuclear waste in the Sea of Japan in the mid 80s. Like, just a really fascinating place. But anyway, at that board meeting for the Fellowship for Intentional Community, there was a small discussion group that split off to talk about founding the America's daughter organization that would sort of branch off of the global eco village network as an ongoing member of that network. And my partner and I sat in and then became really passionately involved. And that really opened the door for me to the world of what is possible in sustainable community. Because it turns out that there are all kinds of things that we regard now as being part of the fabric of our lives. Commercial access to the internet, for example, that came out of the intentional communities movement. And nobody knows, and that's fine. But so when, yeah, go ahead.
You use the term intentional groups, actually, which, to be honest, I've not actually heard someone use that.
Intentional communities. So a lot of the time when people think of intentional communities, they think about sort of late 60s hippie commune where everybody's barefoot and has long hair. And it is true that I have long hair. And actually I'm barefoot. But that doesn't mean that you have to be barefoot or have long hair to live in an intentional community. There's actually, and certainly the commune idea, there are very few communes in a very large intentional communities movement. So communes are income sharing, and I can think of maybe 5 to 10 communes out of thousands and thousands of intentional communities. These days, most intentional communities are places where everybody has their own front door, their own bedroom, bathroom, and kitchen. But there is some kind of a common house or community center where you might have a commercial kitchen, you might have some extra rooms for guests or for teenagers to play video games together or shoot pool. You might have some shared garden space. Really, these days, the intentional communities movement is a way that people can access a quality of life and a way of being connected with each other that is just unavailable elsewhere in our kind of alienated commercial society. And yet it provides a foundation for people to go out and do really effective things in this commercial society. So it's sort of the best of both worlds nowadays.
But
I don't know, is that clear, sort of what I'm talking about, intentional communities?
yeah, I was going to say it's just more of a new term to me, and probably from the UK viewers on this. So that sort of makes sense to me. People living within a community, sharing resource, that sort of thing. So rather than having two spare bedrooms in your house, you have a spare bedroom for the community, that sort of thing.
That kind of thing, exactly. And I should say that there, historically and today, there are intentional communities that have, say, a spiritual focus or a particular kind of environmental focus. There are lots of different groups that have a very specific way of living together. But within the movement as a whole, there's no requirement that you be a particular kind of Christian or that you be a particular kind of Buddhist or that you practice any specific way of living. Broadly speaking, the intentional communities movement is about people finding ways of living that really suit them and having help from their neighbors in doing that. And so that's, I got involved with the eco-village networks, back then in the mid 90s. And since then, I've been working with different kinds of community networks. Most recently, the Sociocratic Neighborhood Circles, or SONIC network, which is strongly inspired by a movement that's come out of southern India, the neighborocracy movement. But all of these have some of these similar qualities, in that it's about living well in ways where neighbors can support each other, and how that what living well means for you is the interesting question.
Could be different for others as well. So is there
Yeah.
actually a definition of what an eco-village actually is?
Well, yes, we came up with a definition, and let's see if I can remember the definition that we were using back in the 90s. Any group of people that has made a demonstrable commitment to ecological, economic, social, or spiritual sustainability. It's a group of people. You have to have a demonstrable commitment. It's not just that, we think it might be nice, but we're actually living together and working together on some kind of sustainability. And then it acknowledges that there are different kinds of sustainability that people might be interested in. Now, other definitions of, what an eco-village is have emerged over the years. Actually, I would suggest that you just look on Wikipedia for the sort of some of the current definitions. But the important thing is that there are lots of different ways that people go about living sustainably, and that can include our physical infrastructure and environmental impact, but it also includes the way we relate to each other and how our economy works. Because I'm sure you're aware of how income inequality in our society can really result in a few very rich people getting a lion's share of our economic productivity and leave some people struggling to make ends meet. Now, economic sustainability might involve a different kind of distribution of wealth, not preventing people from being rich, but ensuring that everybody has access to some level of assets and quality of life. And I'm just using that economic sustainability as another example beyond the environmental one when we're thinking about what it means to have a sustainable way of life.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And you mentioned the word, was it I can't remember. Sociocracy,
Sociocracy.
sociocracy.
Sociocratic or sociocracy. Yeah. So just a very brief dive into that. So sociocracy, as we practice it today, is something that emerged in the Netherlands in the early 20th century and was sort of fully developed in the Dutch marine engineering firm Edinburgh Electrotechnic. And so it's a way that groups of people can organize themselves that ensure that everybody's voice is heard and we're able to move forward effectively together. So there are four principles. That is, anytime you're going to change the rules or make a decision about power, you make that decision by consent. That is, you want to just check, is this something that we can afford to do? Is there a cost or a risk we can't afford to take? And if anybody identifies one, we want to take that into account, redesign the proposal a bit so that we know that we're handling the danger before we move forward. Now, that doesn't mean everybody has to agree that something is a good idea. That's a consensus decision, and that actually can be very difficult to reach and is not what I recommend to people. But knowing that we agree that we can afford to try the experiment, that is really helpful. So you and I might strongly disagree about whether it's a good idea to go into a particular line of business together, for example. And you might say, oh, it's a fantastic idea. I might say, David, you're wrong. I know you're wrong. And deep down, you're wrong too. But we don't actually have to come to an agreement about whether it's a good idea. We just need to find an experiment we can do that will tell us whether you're right or wrong. And so if we can agree that if we can maybe shrink your sort of proposal maybe was, let's go into this whole new line of business. And I say, no, that's flat out too dangerous. So we might shrink that down to, let's try selling one thing to one person in this new area and see what results we get. And then I'll go, okay, I agree that is an affordable experiment. And so really it's about finding ways of moving forward together as quickly as possible using affordable experiments. And this not only works in small teams or between business partners, it actually has become the gold standard for many of these intentional communities and also for worker cooperatives. I happen to be wearing the Federation of Worker Cooperatives launch t-shirt, Cooperate or Die.
I noticed that one. I was going to ask about that. Cooperate or Die.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun because it's sort of like like a pirate might be holding you at gunpoint, but it's not that actually. It's just saying that in our modern civilization, if we can't find a way to get along, we're in trouble. And so it's a sort of a tongue-in-cheek, threatening remark from the cooperative movement. So this sociocracy is now the gold standard for intentional communities, cooperatives, and many organizations that are using things like agile software development or lean manufacturing techniques are also using sociocracy as their governance framework. It works at many different levels of scale, from, as I was saying, the 2 people to tens of thousands of people working collaboratively. And you can even use some of those practices as a coaching methodology. So, I might, if I notice that I'm resisting doing something, I might check in and say, okay, what is it, that you're resisting? What are you afraid might happen? And so I might have those same kinds of consent conversations with the parts of myself that I would have as a facilitator with other people. So, yeah, can you dig it?
Got it. Yeah, and because you said this was born within the Netherlands, but were you actually quite instrumental in bringing it to the UK, the concept?
I was. So I first encountered it through the Eco Village movement in the late 90s. And at that time, at that time, I was so resistant to learning from other people. I was in my 20s. I was smart. I thought like, well, if I haven't invented it, it's probably not that great. And we had just come up with this really fantastic governance system for the Eco Village network. And when I ran into Sociocracy in the late 90s, I was like, we just reinvented that wheel, and our version is probably better. But over the next 10 years, I really had to look more deeply at my relationship with authority and expertise.
Okay.
And I came to understand that actually being guided by other people is an extremely valuable thing. So, we want a world with bottom up organizing and bottom up power. I mean, that's what democracy is all about, right? But we also want a world where we don't have to come up with every bright idea ourselves. We don't want to reinvent the light bulb every time we go to turn the switch. Uh, we want to be guided by centuries or millennia of expertise from other people, and the only way to get there is to be open to being led by them. So yes, we each need to lead and to work together with our neighbors or our colleagues to lead from the bottom up, but we also need to be led. And the best kinds of organizations have a circular flow of power. So over the sort of 10 years between when I encountered sociocracy for the first time and when I was teaching the group facilitation in Southern England, I had done some of that maturing process in myself. And so I was working with a group in the Transition Network in 2007, and I had been teaching them consent facilitation and decision making. And they said, well, how could we scale this up for a larger organization or society? And I thought, hang on a second. I better go back and read that book on sociocracy. And when I reread it, I just was shocked to see that I had thought that I had all the answers, because the system of sociocracy was so much more complete than what we had been doing in the Eco Village network. And it was so much deeper and more sophisticated and really open to both steering and being steered. So I went and got in touch with John Buck, who's my mentor in sociocracy and was the first native English speaker to be certified as a sociocracy consultant. I asked him to start mentoring me, and I shared sociocracy with this transition town group in Brighton and Hove. And since then, over the following several years, we brought John to teach in the UK several times, started a few different sociocracy organizations, the world's first sociocratic cooperative management consultancy, and nowadays, actually, if you go around the transition town movement, or you go to the different cooperative branches of the cooperative movement in the UK, lots of people will talk with you about sociocracy, and it's one of the favorite things for me that I've managed to do.
It sounds a really interesting, fascinating concept. I'm interested, when you first started talking in the UK about it, what sort of reaction did you get from people?
Well, a blank face. I mean, it's like I should say, you probably figured out by now that I'm a raging nerd. And so I can get lost in the details very easily. And the truth is, sociocracy is a way that people organize themselves. It's a kind of governance. And in general, governance is a bit like fiber optic cables. That is, nobody cares about fiber optic cables. I mean, there's a few a few people obviously in the world who do care about that, and like me, they're probably not so good in polite company. The 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 point being, we really like media. We like having broadband internet. We like being able to communicate anywhere in the world in a moment. We couldn't live without fiber optic cables, but or water. It's like water governance. We absolutely require water to survive, but how many people are passionate about water? People care about wine. People care about coffee. People may care about the best dairy substitute, but they do not care about water. And the and yet, so governance is like that, in that when you've got bad water, you find out pretty soon that you need good water to get by. And the same is true with governance, except that there are places in the world where people grow up with bad water and it's just normal for them. And we're so lucky in the UK that we grow up not having to think about water at all.
Yep.
Now, unfortunately, we've all grown up with toxic power in our institutions and we don't know about it. We just see it as normal. We think of trickery and coercion as just how you get things done in the workplace or in politics. It's just, people say, oh, it's just politics. That's it. It's just politics in the workplace. It's just politics in government. What we mean by that is that people are lying and coercing each other, and they don't care what people actually want or what people actually need or what the whole system actually needs. It's bad governance, and we regard it as completely normal. You would be a fool to expect anything else. Well, it turns out that it's just like it's possible to have a society with clean water where people sort of go, you'd be crazy to drink that dirty stuff. It's also possible to have a society with clean governance. And sociocracy is the best system that I know of for getting there, for establishing healthy ways of being powerful together, rather than those toxic forms of coercion and trickery that we've all unfortunately grown up with. The situation where in school, that nobody cares what your special contribution is or what you have to say. You are a child, you will get in line. But there's a sociocratic schools movement, and there's a children's parliament movement, which uses sociocracy, in which young people are leading the way in their schools and in their communities in creating a better world for themselves and for each other. It is possible, even for people who are children or otherwise are not sophisticated experts. It is possible for those people to create order in their own lives and lead each other and create very positive outcomes. Sorry, I've gone off on one, just like I said I probably would.
No, it's fascinating, and I can sort of understand the bigger picture. But in respect of, as you say, schools adopting this, how does it actually work in reality?
Oh, okay, sure. So I should say that I'm actually not an expert in sociocratic schools, but I can speak to it somewhat. The basics are, anytime you're going to bring sociocracy into a new organization, it's actually really important to start by including the existing power structure. So this is not a cut off their heads kind of revolution. It's not about fighting the power that be. It's about finding new ways for the people who are currently in power to exercise their power that are actually more effective ways of being in service. Because it is true that there are some people who are in politics for the wrong reasons, and politics, corrupts people, unfortunately. And the same is true in any kind of institution. So, but a lot of the time, even if people have figured out that they need to be, coercive in order to get the job done, that's not where their heart is, really. They would love to be able to do it a different way if they could find a different way to do it. So what we would often do is we would go into a school and we would start by talking with the head teacher and saying, hey, here's the stuff that's worked really well in other contexts. Would you be interested in learning more about it? And, could we make a presentation to you and your governors and a few other key people in the school about what has worked well in other places? And if they say yes, then we do that. And if they are excited about it, then we might make a larger presentation to more of the school community. And then we might find some way of raising money to go about the process of bringing sociocracy into the school. And what that looks like, once we've had buy-in from the existing power structure, because they can see that it's a more effective way of meeting the needs they're already trying so hard to meet. And often in schools, that means it's a way of doing more with less, eliminating bullying without having to, have a teacher following every student around all day long, just as an example. Then we start training teachers on how to not only teach, but also work as sociocratic facilitators. So, and then we start training students in working with those teachers, and we set up a circle meeting. So a circle meeting is a time for reflection when we look at how things are going and we ask, is there any way that we need to change our system? Is there any way we need to change how we're operating? So you don't make every decision in the circle meeting. Actually, teachers go on making the decisions that are their job to make as teachers. And the same is true with the administrators and everybody else. But when you come together in the circle meeting, that's when you think, do we need to rewrite the rules a little bit? Do we need to have different policies for how teachers teach or how students, relate to each other? Do we need to create a new role, a new kind of administrative role, or a new role that might be filled by a student in the classroom? Do we need a classroom safety officer? Some student might be on the lookout for bullying as it happens. And these kinds of things emerge as part of the conversation, and often they're suggested by students once we start getting the circle meetings happening. And then you have a school that in many ways you would recognize as being just an ordinary school, but there's a deep sense of ownership from the students. And also, frankly, often staff and administrators feel disempowered as well. Not that just because of the ordinary forms of power and how people get things done in our society. And once people have that sense of ownership, then people behave very differently. And it's not a fake sense of ownership. You can't fool people into having it. You can't just do a consultation exercise that's a scam and get this result. It has to be something where people genuinely have the power to make changes, where people are genuinely consenting to the new experiments that you're coming up with together. And then you get this transformation happening, and suddenly bullying drops off substantially, student engagement increases, and you get students leading the way in different kinds of initiatives that otherwise they wouldn't be interested in pursuing, whether those are environmental sustainability initiatives or good citizenship initiatives that might have to do with elder care or raising money for students who can't otherwise afford school lunches or whatever those things might be.
Wow, that really, really amazing, actually. And also wanted to delve into, because you said you've done quite a lot of work in Brighton and introducing the concept there. Can you give us some specifics of what you've been doing with Brighton?
Sure. So the truth is, most of my clients haven't been in Brighton. You know, and I've worked with people around the world and various places in England, but uh, in Brighton, probably the project that I am happiest about is the work that we did with Bright Interactive over a number of years. So Bright Interactive is a software company that works with a number of large organizations around the UK, helping them manage their digital assets. So these are, if people's videos or photos or other things where losing track of, who owns this thing and who took the photo, how do you cite the photo, where do you access it? Uh, the BBC, I think, works with them. These things are really important for organizations that have a lot of digital media. And Bright provides a database service that allows these different organizations to manage their digital assets. And so they have to keep on updating their software on an ongoing basis. So they have several teams that are working together in different ways, doing software development, working with customers, maintaining their systems. And they had been exploring using lean techniques and agile software development techniques in their organization for a while. And they were hitting a wall in terms of how effectively they were able to work together. And so they asked me to come in and do a brief presentation on self-managing teams and how self-managing teams can work together. After I made that presentation, they really were interested in going further with this. And so I worked with them over a number of years, at first doing some small experiments in one specific team so that they could just get a handle on how this might work for them in their context, and then working with them to roll that out across their organization. And what I've heard from them, so we started in 2014, and what I heard from them when I checked in with them last year was that they've gone through multiple generations now of training new people. They've continued to evolve their processes, but what they found is that having the clarity of knowing how to make collaborative decisions together, of knowing when they're delegating power to specific people and how they can change that delegation, and having these consent-based ways of resolving conflicts between people who are trying to lead in different ways in the organization has been invaluable to them. And so I love being able to look back, and they've had a few crises, as many organizations do have, around cash flow, around having to let some people go and and then grow again, and having the ability to rely on the group's decision-making process and not just the leadership of one or a small number of individuals has been tremendously valuable for them. And in fact, what I've heard the last time I talked with one of their co-founders is that his experience of being a leader has really deepened. He feels much more powerful as a leader than he did when we first worked together, because he's able to lead the group in a particular direction, knowing that any buy-in he gets is honest and full buy-in. Because people will surface their issues or surface their objections, people won't hold on to them in secret. They know that it's safe for them to raise these concerns with him. And so by the time that people have said yes, he knows that they're on board. And it lets him be more daring and more of a visionary. And he would be the first person to say that he can be a bit pushy at times. And in a way, you might think that this kind of way of organizing would push out pushy leaders. But no, because other people can push back, it actually makes it safe for him to bring his full energy to the party. And so it's really sweet for me, hearing about how that has gone for him over the years.
That's amazing, because I wouldn't have thought a financially orientated IT business, this would be the sort of thing they would actually engage in and pick up on at all. I was assuming you were going to use a vegan cafe, for an example, or something like that. But for the corporate world, really to adopt it and actually see true value in it for them, I love that. Love that story. Wasn't not what I was expecting.
Yeah, I mean, we all need to be able to cooperate effectively with each other. And obviously, people, we started talking about the intentional communities movement. And, obviously I'm a raging hippie as well as a nerd, but but the corporate world, loses so many millions of pounds due to waste from really simple inability to work together. That these kinds of practices can make a huge difference. And at the end of the day, I make this distinction between toxic power and healthy power. And you've heard me talking about that. At the end of the day, we use toxic ways of being powerful with each other because we're scared. And if somebody comes in and says you have to do a new way of doing things, then that's just going to scare you more. And that's why it's so important to go to the senior leadership, go to the existing power structure, and not be like, we're going to fight you, but instead say, I really want to support you in doing the things that you're here to do. If we really care about creating a massive change in our society, a real revolution in sustainability, then we can't get there by trying to kill off the billionaires. That's just going to be bad news. What we need to be doing is supporting the people who are currently holding the most power in our society, and really asking, what are you most wanting? I understand that in the short term, it looks like you're wanting political power in this, sort of winner takes all sort of political system. But why are you wanting that? And a lot of the time it comes down to legacy. People want to leave something good to their kids. People want to leave something good behind them, and they just don't know that there's a more collaborative approach that's going to be more effective at meeting those needs. And once they see it, then they're the people leading the charge. So that's, I will tell a sort of a more community group story in Brighton. A few years ago, I have a long-term client, which is the Magpie Recycling Cooperative, which is based in Brighton, and they're kind of a Brighton institution. They've got a shop where you can go and buy, reupholstered armchairs or, furniture made out of recycled goods, that kind of stuff. It's, shabby chic, cool art thing. But they were launching a new recycling service for the center of town. And one of their sponsors was a Tory councillor, because, it's more about everybody working together to create a positive, a good community. And Tories care about that too. But this Tory councillor was, a classic no bullshit sort of, we got at the start of the meeting, I was facilitating, and I started to lay out how we were going to work together and asked, just checked any objections. And he said, "This sounds like a bunch of hippie nonsense. So, because I respect Rob, who's the organizer from the cooperative, I'm going to stick around for 20 minutes, but I don't think this is really going to be very helpful." And I said, "Okay, I hear you. I hear where you're coming from, and it sounds like you want an effective meeting, just like I do. And so, thank you for sticking around for 20 minutes, and I look forward to hearing from you whether we're effective 20 minutes from now." After 20 minutes, he decided that he had another 20 minutes in his schedule for it. And he ended up sticking around for the full hour and a half that we had budgeted as a time budget for the meeting. And in his final review, which we usually do in meetings, sociocratic meetings, we like to just get feedback because that's how we learn about how we're doing. That final closing round, he was saying, first of all, the language you're using is hippie language, and it's really off-putting. Second, that was the most effective meeting I've had all month. And I would definitely come back to another one. So I'm happy to use this hippie language if it gets things done.
That's the thing. It makes sense. I can see how some people would be put off initially because of their preconceptions of what you're talking about, but it just makes so much sense the more we talk about it. But I want to sort of bring us more up to speed now, because you co-founded a Fairer Society in 2016.
That's correct. Yep.
So tell me the backstory on this.
So a lot of the time, co-founders are not the people who actually were there at the absolute beginning. And this is one of those examples. So actually, Peter and another person named Alex had started it, and they were looking for another person to help them take what they were doing to the next level. And we were introduced to by some friends in the conscious business community, and started talking. And I was saying, "Oh, it sounds like you're trying to do this, and I suggest that you use those approaches. Thank you so much for meeting me. And I'd be happy to work with you as a consultant if you want to get there." And they sort of looked at each other and then turned back to me and said, "How about you are a co-founder, and we'll get you on board." So long story short, I was suckered. I thought I was going to get money out of this deal. They brought me in, and we made a slight pivot. So you remember I was talking about, these days, a lot of the intentional communities movement is about people having their own bedroom, bathroom, and kitchen, their own front door, this community center. So what I'm describing there is specifically a co-housing community. That is, people have their own houses or their own flats, but then there's some community areas, some community property that everybody has access to. And those kinds of communities are, managed cooperatively by the people who live there. So I helped Alex and Peter pivot into co-housing development. And that's been where we've worked ever since. Now, Alex had to step out because her partner was having a baby, and she wanted to focus on, the core part of her estate agency practice to make sure she could support her partner. And so, we're still friends, but she stepped out of the business. So at this point, Peter and I are the co-founders. But although we've continued to work on the housing development, and I'm really proud of what we're doing in the housing world. I'll talk about the cooperative gentrification business model that we've come up with in just a moment.
Yep.
The I also brought my consultancy business in. So, the work that I've been doing in cooperative sociocratic management consultancy, the work I've been doing with agile and lean organizations, those kinds of things I brought into a fairer society so that we were doing this organizational transformation work, the leadership development work, as well as the community development work. So I will briefly say that about this sort of cooperative gentrification thing. What the heck is that? So gentrification has really mixed reviews these days, and it should have mixed reviews. On one hand, there are a lot of local politicians, local development organizations that love gentrification. You have sort of an artsy neighborhood with a really nice culture. People start investing more in it. The local economy grows. You get more businesses coming in. Property values go up. There's a lot of measures in which gentrification looks great. And, Brighton is a perfect example of a place where that's happened. Hastings, where I'm about to move, and we're doing a lot of work right now, is sort of in the start of that kind of upswing of development. And people want to move to places where gentrification is happening. That's sort of the definition of it.
Yeah.
But the downside is that affordability disappears. The people who were living there that made it desirable, these sort of the working class communities, the artists, the activists, the people who've started to make it attractive as a place to live, get priced out. And for long, it's just a soulless yuppie heaven where a bunch of chain stores have come in and outbid everybody else. And who wants to live there? Well, let's go on and displace the next community. So cooperative gentrification combines this upswing in economic value and cultural value that you get over and over again with different kinds of gentrification in different communities, but it prevents this pricing out from happening. And the way that we do that is that we buy rundown properties in areas that are starting to see an uptick in local economic value. And we do them up, and then we sell them at a higher price. Sounds just like ordinary gentrification, but we sell them to a cooperative so that they can be cooperatively owned. And so that instead of having these places be resold several times with higher prices every time, instead they're held by the cooperative and rented at reasonable prices that do not keep going up even as the local economy grows. So what we're doing is we're freezing, we're taking the uptick in value so that we can do this over and over again, but we're freezing that growth cycle at a more affordable level. And then it can stay that way forever because the co-op doesn't need to keep engaging in that business model. And so I'm very proud of this approach. We're just completing the first one right now and getting started on the second one. So, we'll have to wait to see how successful we are in this model. But I actually think that we can apply that to a few other areas as well, buying businesses and buying other community assets, this sort of cooperative gentrification approach.
I love it. If I'm being totally honest, I hadn't looked into or thought about the downsides of gentrification. But I can totally see how that pushes people out of the area that helped create the demand for the area in the first place. That's a really interesting idea, the cooperatives owning the building and just keeping fixed rents or low rents.
rents that might be tied to local income, for example, over the long term, or tied to actual costs, rather than being tied to market rate, the market value of the property.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of property investors that might be watching this who are thinking, oh my God.
People who know you, perhaps.
Indeed. But no, I really love the concept of that. That makes so much sense. Cool. So there's a couple of other things I wanted to ask about as well, because I'm just conscious we're a bit short on time.
Sure.
The polycrisis.
Yes, you might have run across this phrase. Some people are calling it the meta crisis. Some people are calling it the polycrisis. Well, so we're all aware that we're in the middle of an ecological crisis with, climate, CO2 driving extreme weather, and we probably have heard things about ocean acidification or loss of biodiversity, changing land use patterns. So the thing is that each of these pieces reinforces the others. If you have the temperature going up worldwide, that also results in coral bleaching and the extinction of species, and that results in the that loss of biodiversity means that then the global ecology can't absorb carbon as well, which drives more extreme weather events, right? It's a self-reinforcing cycle. But this is not the only self-reinforcing cycle we're dealing with globally. We're also dealing with self-reinforcing cycles around poverty and migration and conflict. So so climate change, for example, in Syria, creates economic crises, which creates political instability, which creates civil war, which creates migration. And then you have migrants moving, and then that mass migration creates more polarized political situations across Europe. And some of that results in populist movements where you might have people who are climate deniers taking power, who are then going to invest in exactly the kind of situations that reinforce the climate change, and therefore the things that lead to the migration in the first place. And there are lots of these kinds of feedback loops going on, unfortunately, in our global society right now, in economics, in social justice, conflict, and the environment. And as these mutually reinforcing things move in a negative direction, it becomes harder and harder to handle any of them. And it's very difficult to handle all of them at once. And this is what people call the polycrisis. But the reason that I talk about the polycrisis is not just to scare people or to get us so depressed that we can't do anything in the morning. It's because actually we have a way of handling the polycrisis. So there are technical fixes that we can use. We can invest in renewables to reduce our carbon impact from economic growth, for example. But we've gotten ourselves into this situation actually by trying to do technical fixes that address only one part of the polycrisis. And this brings us back to the issue of toxic power. So the polycrisis is really a story of short-term solutions creating long-term problems. Yep. It's a story of saying we need economic growth, so we're going to ignore the impact on the environment. We're going to ignore the impact on communities that might be suffering from pollution. So it's this thing of greed and fear, or helplessness and selfishness, driving these short-term solutions that make everything else worse. And every time you try to solve one part of the polycrisis using toxic power, you make the rest of it worse. And if we try to solve the whole thing using toxic power, we'll make all of it worse at once. And so the only way to go about solving something that has so many interconnected pieces and that involves so much of our lives is actually to shift to healthy ways of being powerful together, where you can really listen to all the different voices that are involved in creating a solution so that you can check. And this goes back to this conversation about consent. Is this going to make things worse in ways we can't afford? And that's both a way to have sort of more effective technical solutions, but it's also a way that brings the fear levels down. Because if people know that they're going to be heard, that their group of stakeholders is going to be listened to in the political process, they don't feel like they have to fight as hard. And that means they're more able to get involved in creative problem solving together, which means that it becomes politically possible to find solutions that would otherwise be inaccessible due to the conflict in our political system or our society as a whole. So the polycrisis, that's the stuff you see in the newspaper every day. It might seem like it's not connected, but it's all connected. And the polycrisis is why we need to shift immediately from a world that runs on toxic power to a world that runs on healthy power. And it's why I'm wearing this t-shirt. We must cooperate effectively, or we're not leaving a survivable world to our kids or our grandkids. And I've got 2 kids, and I want to leave a world that works for them. So that's why I'm doing this.
And this all makes sense, and it's been brilliant talking to you because I can get my head around how this works on small group basis and larger groups. But when you actually start talking about a global issues here, I'm struggling to get my head around how that actually.
There's we might not have time to go into that in any depth today. But I will say that some of the organizations that I'm working with have advisor status in the UN. The Global Eco Village Network has advisor status in the UN. The Provisional World Children's Parliament is involved in UN youth leadership and has advisor status. And there are lots of people globally who are looking for ways that we can shift into a more collaborative world and drop the kind of saber rattling approach that is currently being led by, for example, Russia and North Korea. And if we can shift into a more collaborative world system, then we will all benefit. And if we can't, then we're sunk. So, we don't have time to get into all the details of the, exactly which political movements are involved and how. But I will say that these kinds of approaches to collaboration that I'm talking about on a very small scale are also showing up at the largest scales. And I'm really excited for the ways that A Fairer Society is able to be part of that. I should say A Fairer Society is a strategic partner of and a official advisor to some of these organizations I've just mentioned that are supporting the UN. So, we're doing a very small part in a very large movement, but that is some of the work that we're doing.
You're doing it, and that's the main thing that it's all about, isn't it? Rather than just thinking and talking about it. I love this. It's been really fascinating talking to you about this. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but we must get you on again. There's so many more questions I've got to ask about this because it's still, to me, a relatively new subject. It's something I had preconceptions on what you were going to be talking about today. And to be honest, you've really changed my view of this. I think it's fascinating.
Well, thank you so much, David. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I enjoy the way that you hold space, and I'd love to go further with you again in the future if you want to come back together with me on this.